So a lot of churches have been in the virtual church mode for a long time. Some cities and some states have fully reopened and others haven't. There are lots of churches that have put a date on the calendar and they're going to reopen on a particular date. It might be different for you, but there's something that a lot of us probably aren't thinking of. And particularly those of you who are senior pastors, those of you who are lead pastors or on the executive leadership team of your church, you have to think about what are people on staff thinking about reopening. A lot of the focus has been on what does your church think, right? A lot of churches are sending out surveys. I know my church did that. We got some really great information from it. A lot of churches are thinking about what do our people want? What are they asking for? What can they handle at this point? But a lot of churches haven't really stopped to think or consider what their staff is thinking. And there was a really great article, which I want to show you, from Birch. Rich is a good friend of mine. He is the founder of Unseminary.com. Really great guy. You should totally be following Rich. He wrote an article this week that I think is so on point and something that I don't think anybody's talking about. So I was super excited to share it with you. And here is the article. 5 fears about reopening that church staff aren't telling their leaders. So these are fears that are not fears that the church is having. They're not fears that, the community is having. This is staff. So if you have a church that has staff, here is what your staff is likely not telling you. So let's dig in. He says, this has been a strange season to be working in the local church. Just a few months ago, we all made the pivot to entirely digital, and that felt like the biggest change in our history of leading the local church. At that point, we thought it would only be a few weeks that we would need to be in lockdown. Remember those days? Remember when it was like, let's just shut things down for a couple of weeks until this all blows over, 15 days to slow the spread, and we'll be back to business. And a lot of churches that only planned on those first 2 weeks really missed an opportunity because it ended up being a lot longer. And so all of us had to adjust, some maybe better than others, to this isn't a couple of weeks, this is like 2 or 3 or 4 months. So those days, if you look back on that was like early March or mid-March, and we were all thinking, hey, this is weird, but only a couple of weeks. Well, now we know that's it. It went in a different direction than that. Now we find ourselves facing what seems to be an even more complex season of ministry. This transition to whatever the next normal looks like is going to be incredibly difficult to navigate. This will likely include some mixed variety of digital services, small group meetings, and some version of large group meetings in our auditorium. I love church leaders. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can be more effective and what to do to reach more people around us. This is one of the reasons why I love Rich Birch. I think he's one of the gold standards of people who help church leaders thrive because he just loves pastors and church leaders. Over the last few months, I've spent quite a bit of time, this is Rich saying this, spent quite a bit of time listening to and chatting with church leaders from across the country. While none of the fears that I write about here have been explicitly expressed by the individual leaders that I spoke with, they do resonate with the conversations that I've been having. My challenge to senior leaders today is to find some time in the coming weeks to listen carefully to what your leaders are saying and even more carefully to what they're not saying. And this is something that if you're a lead pastor in a church, you have to realize this about your staff. And if you've ever been in any position other than the lead pastor, you'll know what I'm saying. People around you on your staff want your approval. They don't want you to be disappointed in them, and they don't want you to feel like they don't believe in the mission and vision of the church and that they're not on board. So a lot of times your staff will follow your vision only because they don't want to disappoint you and they want your approval. And there's all kinds of reasons why. Maybe they just want to keep their job and they fear that if they're really honest with you and disagree with the direction that you want to take the church, that you're going to be, that their days are going to be numbered after that. Or it might just be that they really do love the vision, love the mission, and they want to be in on it with you. They're so afraid to tell you that they're not fully on board with every single decision. And then the other reason might just be because you, for better or worse, have created a culture where the people around you don't feel like they can be honest with you. And that's also a problem. So no matter what, you got to think about what are the people on your staff truly thinking and can they share that with you? And whether it's related to reopening or any other decision that's being made, that's something really important to consider. He says these fears represent some real pain points that our staff are going through in this season as we face what comes next in our churches. So here are 5 fears about reopening that your staff may be feeling but aren't talking to you about. So here they are. Number 1, I don't like crowds anymore. So he talks about the fact that your staff, just like your church, might be just a little bit apprehensive about the idea of getting back together and having to lead people in a staff capacity, because that means crowds, it means groups, it means volunteers, it means attendees and guests. So this could be just kind of a point of stress for a lot of people that they just haven't experienced before. Here's one I really like. He says, I'm done with church online. This is what your staff might be thinking, because we've all been talking about how amazing this is going to be. This is the new normal, right? We're going to be doing church online. We're going to have digital services. We're going to provide all these opportunities, because why would we stop? It's worked so well, okay? And here's what he says. We've been celebrating this amazing season of digital ministry, but that's mostly because we haven't had any alternative. As senior leaders, we've been telling our people that this represents the future. We've been communicating how important it is for us to shift all of our ministries to digital and online in order to continue to connect with our people. However, I suspect that many of our staff are just done with church online. We're starting to see that this is the case in the broader church as attendance is dropping and engagement is decreasing. Many of our staff are probably fearful of actually telling us that they are also tired of it, despite the fact that their perspective might actually help fix the issue. This is another thing I find to be very interesting, because when we first started with church online, digital, virtual church, we saw amazing engagement and amazing attendance, and we were just blown away. Lots of churches were. And we had our micro churches and everything was great. And everything's going well still, but what we found is that just like in-person services, the digital services started to wane in attendance, started to wane in engagement, started to ebb in people being involved and excited because it wasn't new and fresh anymore. And so the thought that, man, digital is just the thing that's going to save us going into the future, it's probably going to follow the pattern of in-person services, and that is, it's just another tool to engage people, but is not the end-all be-all. So he says this, let's create space to address the ways that church online isn't meeting our needs and what we need to do to change that. If we could talk honestly about what is inadequate about the church online experience, now that we've been in it for a few weeks, we might actually be able to push to a deeper level of innovation. What is it about church online that's so dissatisfactory? How do we change those things for the future waves of this pandemic, and also for people who may never enter the doors of our church but are connecting online? I think those are really great questions. Okay, if it's not satisfying, why? One of the things that we found is that people just sitting in their living rooms and staring at a screen and watching a broadcast of a message and some worship songs is not enough to keep them engaged, to keep them coming back, to keep them investing financially in the ministry. What we found is that we had to build micro churches where people are experiencing this together in community and then being able to walk with each other through life, virtually at first and now in homes and virtually, depending on the comfort level of the people. But that's what we found. And so your staff might be burned out. And so when they hear you say things like, man, well, when we go back, we're gonna need to really ramp up our digital footprint. We're gonna need to have people live host. We're gonna have to have people, maybe more online services all throughout the week. What they hear is, okay, so when we go back, it's going to be just a math. And this is one of the points that Rich makes later on in this article, is that my workload is going to double or triple when we go back because of the digital experience that's now going to have to be even more complex. So that's just something to think about. Another thing he says, I work in kids ministry. We're opening without my area. What does that mean? One of the saddest things I've seen in this reopening process is that some churches across the country are planning to open without any form of kids ministry. The not so subtle message you're sending to your kids ministry team is what they have suspected all along. Kids ministry is nothing more than babysitting so that adults can sit freely in the main room. Okay, that's tragic. Okay, it's one of the reasons why we never refer to it as childcare. It's always kids ministry or kids city in our case. It is never babysitting or childcare. So a couple things about this. One, because our state doesn't allow or didn't allow in phase 1 any kids classes, we didn't open in person. We just decided if we can't have kids ministry, we're not going to open. So when we open on July 12th, there will be kids ministry as a part of what we're doing. So if your church is looking at opening without kids ministry, you are making a grievous strategic error, according to Rich Birch, and he knows his stuff. Here's what he says. Kids ministry has always cultivated some of the most innovative leaders in the church. Kids ministry is a growth engine and is one of the major reasons why growing churches are growing. To reopen a church without kids ministry, I would contest, is not actually reopening the church. That's a bold statement from Rich, and I love it. I think it's awesome. If you cannot open kids ministry, do not reopen your adult ministry. There are many strategic reasons to consider here, but think about the damage you'll be doing to your staff and leaders, not to mention your wider church, if you don't include kids ministry as an important part of your whole. Now, he's mentioning the effect on staff, and particularly kids ministry staff, and I totally agree with him. In this video right here, in this card that you can click on, I did a video about delaying reopening, not rushing into it. And one of the reasons I gave was what it would be like to have kids in the auditorium with you and how that would affect your worship experience overall. So definitely check that out if you want to see more about that. Okay, so to go on, he says, another point that your staff may not be telling you is, I'm tired, like really tired. Now, a lot of people who are unfamiliar with church work, they look at the fact that we're not meeting in buildings or haven't been meeting in buildings for the last several weeks or months, and they go, well, what are you guys doing? And they don't realize that there's been an uptick in personal engagement, because there has to be, because you have to stay connected. There's been a total reshift in how we even do church. These services have to be produced, they have to be planned. There's a whole lot of work. And so your staff might be truly tired. He says this, I'll say it again. This has been a very strange season for people who work in the local church. There's a meme that's been floating around that says, how is it that we're not doing any public meetings or anything at the church building, but our staff is busier than ever before? That's very true. I would suspect that in your church, many people haven't taken any vacation during these last 3 months because there hasn't been anywhere to go or anything to do. On top of that, people have been wondering about the future of their jobs, so the thought of taking time off right now has not made sense. The problem is we're heading into a reopening phase that will be more demanding than the phase we just went through. The complexity of ministry is only going to increase in the coming weeks and months, let alone if we find ourselves with a substantial second wave that forces us back into a lockdown scenario. Your team is tired. He says, I would strongly recommend that you think through what you're going to do with vacation time in the coming weeks and months. People need to push back, unplug, and not worry about the live feed or what's happening in the chat room. One more week to rest, to sleep in, to find some sense of new normal. I understand this can be difficult in this season, but if we don't give our people an opportunity to take time off, it will only impact our ministries and our team's ability to stay healthy in the long run. So I completely agree with this. There's different ways that this wears people out, but it definitely has that effect. And so if what you're telling your team is, guys, get ready, we are about to just go gangbusters and it's going to be awesome, take some time to realize that they might be tired, and you might need to work in some language there about, hey, we're going to work in some rest so that we're ready to go in this next phase. And then finally, he says, I feel a little lost. So your staff might be saying this, I feel a little lost. This has been a destabilizing season. There's no doubt about that. There are people on your team today who are not really sure what's next. The path is unclear. Ministry during normal season is already a bit destabilizing and uncomfortable because we're constantly dealing with people who have real issues, and our job is to help them take steps closer to Jesus. The wins are sometimes not entirely evident. The rewards can feel few on a week in and week out basis. Our job in the season is to clarify the roles that people need to be filling and the work that we're asking them to do. In this season, it's up to you and me as leaders to give clear direction, even if that means brand new job descriptions and weekly, monthly, and or quarterly key performance indicators that our teams can push towards. Team members may feel strange raising their hand to say that they feel lost because they might fear that will reflect poorly on their ability to cope in this season. Again, your staff wants your approval, so they're going to suck it up. They're not going to say anything, but inside they're going, I don't know where I fit in this new paradigm. I don't know what my greatest contribution is. I'm not sure how this is going to look, and I'm kind of afraid of what's coming. So take time now to get back to the basics around defining the win and clarifying the next steps for your team. This is one of the things that my church is doing, where we're taking some time to really map out, what does the next normal look like? What does it look like to go back, even though we don't like saying to go back? What does it look like to re-enter our campuses and in-person services? And it's an opportunity for us to really look at everything we do at a fundamental level and make significant changes. And we just have to be sure as church leaders, especially if you're the lead pastor, to make sure that you're bringing people along in that process. And then Rich, of course, leaves us with some vision. In times of great adversity, the church shines. There's no doubt that these weeks and months have been filled with all kinds of adversity. We need to work carefully and closely with our teams and help them weather this season and pivot well into what's coming next. And then he has some resources for you below. I'll link to this article in the description. And always, on this channel, I love to talk about these kind of things, what's going on in the church. So definitely leave a comment below. Where are you in the reopening process, and how is your staff doing? I want to hear from you below. Also, if you go to preachingdonkey.com/21 days, you can pick up my free 21-day guide to creating killer sermons. It's a 3-week process that helps you navigate through creating and delivering a compelling message. I would love to put that in your hands for free. And be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next video.